Republican candidate for governor has sent a letter to the Wisconsin Parole Board demanding that they not grant parole to a man who was convicted in 1985 of a brutal murder in Kenosha County. Now remember, in Wisconsin, we don't have parole anymore. But the people that were sentenced when we still had parole remain eligible. So if the crime occurred back in the 1900s, there's a good chance that the individual is eligible for parole. It was about 2 decades ago that we passed truth in sentencing in the state of Wisconsin, where when you give an individual a term, they may be eligible for early release, but by and large, you serve the majority of your term. The parole system was one that we had in place forever, in which the judge would sentence someone to a term and they would become eligible for parole after serving a fraction of that. But eligible doesn't mean that you get it. Getting the parole is based on the ideology of the people that are in charge of the parole commission. We had a recent story that I think has been very revealing about some of the empty suits in the Republican legislature and their unwillingness to use their authority to have even the limited impact in public policy that they can. Also, an indication of what Democrats stand for and how they are willing to sell out their beliefs if they think it will help them politically. The Parole Board, which is run by John Tate, a Tony Evers appointee, big-time Racine liberal who doesn't believe in locking people up, decided to release a guy who served 1/3 of an 80-year sentence for stabbing his wife to death 42 times in front of their children. Once that story came out and all of the Republican candidates for governor demanded that it be reversed, Evers, after a day and a half of not knowing what to do, essentially had them reverse the decision, knowing that it was going to be an impossible decision to defend in a political campaign. Republican members of the state legislature have had an opportunity to remove the parole commission head from office. I shouldn't say legislature, state Senate. The state assembly has no role here. And the majority of Republican senators have chosen to do nothing because many of them like to talk a good game when it comes to crime, but are unwilling to act with regard to crime. The most disappointing, I think, of all of them is Chris Kappinger from Western Waukesha County, who at one point was an unapologetic conservative and has now become simply the buddy of the power structure, in particular the Senate Majority Leader Devin LeMahieu. Kappinger actually gave an interview in which he said he's not sure that the decision was all that egregious. Imagine that, a Western Waukesha County, conservative area of the state of Wisconsin as exists, state senator saying he doesn't think, not sure, if a guy getting out after serving 1/3 of a time for murder, and especially brutal, is egregious or not. Which brings us to this story and the way that it's playing out. And I think the way that it's playing out is, to me, the most interesting component of it. One of the guys that's eligible for parole was accused and convicted back in 1985 of murdering a man named Joseph Vite. It's in Bristol, which is in Kenosha County. You talk about a guy who was making personal sacrifices to make the world better. Vite was 42 years old. He and his wife had 12 foster children. That's not the easiest life in the world. Having 12 children is difficult. Foster children often come from difficult environments and can present all sorts of challenges. Takes an incredible amount of patience to be able to do it. One of the foster kids decided that they were going to kill Joseph Vite. Guy's name was Daniel Dower. He got his friend Eric Nelson involved. They were inspired, some of you may remember the case, by the game that was huge back in the 80s, Dungeons & Dragons. Remember that game? You probably played that game. Paul says he still plays it now. he did not. Said he never played it. Anyway, Dower shot Joe Vite in the elbow. Nelson murdered him with a shot to the forehead. That was back in 1985. Every few months, Dower becomes eligible for parole. And he's up again. In this case, the family of Joe Vite has contacted Republican candidate for governor, Kevin Nicholson, and asked him to get involved to try to do what he could to draw attention to the case in hopes that the Parole Commission does not release Dower. And Kevin Nicholson has written a letter to the Parole Commission urging them not to do so, and I think it's going to work. I think that it's going to be nigh on impossible to get Tony Evers' Parole Commission between now and November to release anybody convicted of murder. Once the election is over, the floodgates are going to open, but I think they all know, the Evers people are smart enough to know that the public is now onto what his Parole Commission is doing, and they're not going to release these people so long as we get at least some knowledge that Republicans are aware of the case. So I think the family did the right thing in contacting Kevin Nicholson, and Kevin Nicholson's doing the right thing in publicizing the case. But isn't it revealing who the Vite family contacted? I think they would have gotten the same response had they contacted Rebecca Clayfish or contacted Tim Michaels. I think any of those campaigns would publicly draw attention to the case and write a letter to the Parole Commission saying, don't do it. Why? Well, they're running for governor. They want to show that they're responsive to the needs of conservatives, Republican constituents, etc. What the Vite family didn't do is write a Republican member of the state Senate. Where they live, they might have Van Wangard. They didn't write Van Wangard. They didn't write Devin LeMahieu. They didn't write any Republican member of the state Senate because they rightly assumed that if they contacted a member of the state Senate, they wouldn't do one damn thing about it. Because Republican members of the state Senate have essentially neglected their responsibility so long as Tony Evers has been the governor and have stood up to him on virtually nothing. The one area that the legislature has responsibility of the executive branch is the Senate, not the Assembly. The Senate has equal authority in determining who are the heads of state agencies. The governor nominates, and the Senate has to confirm. The state Senate has made it clear that no matter how terrible the Tony Evers appointee is, they are not going to refuse to confirm any of them. Now, most of those Republican senators, some of them aren't even up for election this year. Others are unopposed, so they don't feel any particular need to be responsive. But the candidates for governor clearly have that need. What often happens is once people get in office, they find that the need to do what the people who elected them goes away. So if the Vite family had contacted me, Mr. Belling, we'd like to draw attention to this case so Evers' people don't release this monster who killed Joe, who would you have us contact? And I wouldn't have said any of the I would have said any of the prominent Republican candidates for governor. I think they'll do a good job drawing attention to it, but I certainly would not have told them to contact the Wisconsin State Senate Republicans because they've demonstrated that with the exception of a handful of them, Senator Roth in particular, Senator Nass is another, that they aren't going to stand up and try to stop the Evers administration from releasing criminals. That is a sad reality. I mentioned Chris Kapiga. He's up for re-election this year. He doesn't have a Republican opponent. So his attitude is, what do I have to do what Republicans want? It's again, that's unfortunate, but I'm calling them as I see them. It's reality. Now let's imagine you had a Republican candidate, one of the Republican candidates for governor, and I want to make it clear this is a fake example. You could even throw in Ramthun. If any of the four said, I don't think we should do anything to Tony Evers' Parole Commission, Republican voters would have been infuriated. The other three would have been on the right side of this. You can't face the voters when you're showing what a wussy, ineffectual sellout you are. Which shows you where most Republican voters are, and I'm here to tell you that the majority of Republicans in the state Senate don't care. And again, I wish that wasn't true, but it is true. And those who have always tried to pass themselves off as conservatives, like Senator Kappinger and Senator Weingart, should be held to a higher standard. They ought to demand that the Senate come into session, and they ought to out the sellouts that are in their caucus who never want to do anything. And Senator Kappinger would rather not hack off Senator Darling and Senator Coles and some of the other people who supported him for Senate president than do the right thing. Some people claim that this is an argument for term limits, that these people get in there and they get soft. Well, I don't think that that's correct, because some of the people that remain strong on this, indeed, have Senator Doss has been in there forever. He's never gone soft. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you get involved in that Madison environment and you do become Madisonized. I'm not going to name the individual, but I made a comment a few weeks ago that one of the problems is the legislature staff in Madison. That if you work for the state legislature, almost certainly you live in Madison. They're creatures of that same environment. They all pal around together. And these are the people that give guidance and input to the legislator, that the people that tell them what's coming in their mail and what the phone calls are like, and the people that, they're full-time employees. Members of the legislature are there only part-time. And somebody who is a former legislative aide contacted me and said, I'm dead out on this. That most of those people who work for the legislature get their jobs in the state legislature straight out of college, and it's the only life they know. And those that come with real world experience and come to the state capitol maybe a little bit later in life to work as a legislative aide, they have to buck up against these kids that have their political science degrees. And as much as they like to think that they're conservatives, they're the Madisonized version of conservatives who have tremendous respect for all of these polluted left-wing institutions.